welcome everybody. We'll get this going immediately. I'm Mark Bass. I'm the director of the Bledsoe Center and also the director of the minor in Religion and Public Life, which Owen Fletcher is a participant in. Owen is a major in international studies with minors in Hispanic studies and in our own program here, Religion, America, and Public Life. He's been an intern in the center run by my friend and colleague Dan Justin Slakowski, the Center for Christian Jewish Learning. And before we hand it over to you, Dan, do you want to say a few words?
Yeah, I just want to, again, thank Mark for hosting us here. So what Owen's presenting to you all today is the culmination of his internship project through the Center for Christian Jewish Learning. And I'm really excited about the way in which it's been manifested. And this internship is open to any undergraduate or graduate students who have any interest in Jewish-Christian relations in any way whatsoever. So if you're looking for an internship opportunity, there's rolling applications.
Business in my
Please come my way.
Well, it's great to see everybody here at the Bledsoe Center. And Debbie and Ed will be talking about what they are doing and the work they are doing. I think that maybe I can start off with a presentation about what the work was and the internship that I've been doing for the past year. So, as an international studies student, I've been very interested in migration, and I've been studying it through this very critical lens of the international and the international sphere. But through the internship with the center, I was able to look at it in a different way, and look at it through a wider Christian and Jewish lens, which otherwise I probably wouldn't have. So I began my research in this way, looking at the sacred texts of both the Hebrew Bible and the Christian New Testament, both of which are filled with examples of migratory peoples. We can have this central story of Abram, called by God to move to the land of Canaan, and renamed Abraham after his journey. We can read Exodus as a migration story, and we cannot overlook Leviticus' calls to love the stranger. In the New Testament, Jesus' Sermon on the Mount has a central theme of an other. And in the epistles, St. Paul's letters are directed to churches in the diaspora, and Peter's first letter is addressed to communities in exile. Moreover, in the Christian imagination, we can think of the Holy Spirit as driving migration, and of Jesus as both a stranger, a guest, and a migrant. All of these stories, rooted in the Torah and the Bible, help to conceptualize the migrant in a theological way. Beyond simply reading these texts and having this idea of the migrant in mind, we can have a distinct ethic that forms out of this theology. To generate this ethic, we must both understand the idea of the stranger, from wherever they come, and the other, that is, someone that is not like ourselves, as both related to and in proximity to the self. In the ideas of 19th century German Jewish philosopher Hermann Cohen, it is the focus and care for the other which makes the self whole. Just as we have ideas of push and pull factors when we're talking about migration, Rabbi Jonathan Sachs acknowledges the pull of loving one's neighbor as commanded to by Scripture, but the push of having to learn how to do so. In this, it may be more difficult to love the stranger than it is a neighbor who is like us. In the Christian tradition, and specifically drawing from Catholicism, we can think of the Catholic social thought principles of human dignity and solidarity as central to the creation of an ethic surrounding the migrant other. Here too, the love for this other comes to the forefront, especially with the corporal works of mercy, and we can think especially of the call to shelter the homeless. Both Christian and Jewish thought, however, are rooted in a hospitality ethic, especially for the most vulnerable populations. These, as Deuteronomy tells us, are the widow, the orphan, and the foreigner among you. In my research, I took this information into account with interviews of upwards of a dozen people engaged in migration work in and around Boston, and I drew from theological and ethical ideas, asking questions through a sociological framework, leading to a deeper but not yet complete understanding of faith in this work. Through these conversations, I wanted to know not only why people involved themselves in this type of work, but what the work was that they were doing. With this idea of faith, it became clear that it was personal understanding and meaning that drove this definition, not something that I could read simply in a dictionary. Caring, as I discussed with people that I interviewed was related to direct service. Justice, on the other hand, was related to changing systems. In this way, faith drove people to work through charity and caring into social justice and action. Justice here ensured that work was not simply a band-aid for deeper problems, but truly acted to change systems. And because there is not simply one interpretation of justice, this kind of work takes many different forms. Now, because both of our speakers are engaged in refugee resettlement, I think it might be helpful to give a brief overview of the resettlement process. So the U.S. Refugee Resettlement Program is a public-private partnership which takes this form that a political scientist might call federalism, involving international governmental and non-governmental organizations, federal agencies, state and local governments, communities, and private citizens. Interestingly, on the federal level, of the 9 domestic resettlement agencies, 6 of them are what we can call religiously inspired, both in name and in mission. These include HIAS, the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, and the USCCB, the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops, which operate on a federal level with affiliates at the state and local levels. This is where Jewish Family Services of MetroWest and Catholic Charities through the Paulist Center come into the picture. While private citizens might meet the basic needs of refugees, like affordable and livable housing, it is these local agencies that assist refugees in navigating U.S. systems, like filing for public benefits and school registration. Resettlement by such groups, we must keep in mind, is not missionary work. It does not require the conversion of those that are assisted, but rather holds the respect for these people as human persons and their identities as central. Work builds upon that of other groups, both religious and secular, with necessary cooperation between them. One might be led, knowing that the systems like that are in place, to think that migration is a topic only of importance at the southern border or in New York City via bus routes. But even and especially in Boston, it is a very local reality, and one that we will be exploring for the remainder of this hour. In fact, just this summer, Governor Maura Healey declared a state of emergency to address the migrant crisis in Massachusetts. It is a real crisis, and our speakers will help us to understand it better. And with this, as I'm leading the discussion, we'll open it up later for a wider conversation, so I hope people can keep questions in mind. And I'd love to just introduce the speakers before we get started. So Debbie Gotbetter is an active volunteer and board member with Jewish Family Services of MetroWest in Framingham, which is a nonprofit community-based organization focused on immigrant and resettlement programs and the support of vulnerable older adults. She received her BA from the University of Rochester and a Master of Social Work from Smith College School for Social Work. She's an engaged member of Temple Beth Elohim, a Reformed Jewish community in Wellesley, where she serves as Vice President of Development and a founding member of the Temple's Immigration Justice Group. Since 2016, she's volunteered as Refugee Resettlement Volunteer Coordinator, enabling this community to welcome and resettle 13 families to the U.S. With strong community partners, the group's resettlement work has served as a model for other congregations and private groups to welcome refugee families. Ed Marakovitz has volunteered as the coordinator of the Paulist Center Immigrant Advocacy Group since its inception in 2017. And the Paulist Center is based out of downtown Boston. He has a Master's of Social Work degree from the Boston College School of Social Work, specializing in community organizing and social planning. Using these talents at the Paulist Center, during the past 5 years, the IAG's 200 members have volunteered in 2 church-based sanctuaries, sponsored prayer vigils for immigrants at the Suffolk County House of Correction, and conducted extensive policy advocacy. For the past 18 months, the group has volunteered in resettling Afghan refugees, working closely with St. Cecilia's Catholic Church, Catholic Charities, the Islamic Center of Boston, and the Islamic Society of North America. So with that, I'd like to just begin the conversation with you two. And knowing that Governor Maura Healey has instituted this state of emergency to address the migrant crisis, I wonder what is different about the current situation, why we can call it truly a crisis, and how maybe the work that you've done in the past has been able to inform what you are doing now.
Let me start. Well, first of all, so impressive what you've accomplished. So,
By the way, I
congratulations.
just want to point out that Owen's mother is sitting right
I-
there. She is herself quite respectful.
I already shared my how impressed I am. And I think what our conversations really led to sort of helping me put all of these thoughts together. So I'm impressed that you put that together in a paper. I think part of when we think about crisis, we know that crisis is just responding, and we don't do our best work when we are in a crisis. We respond and we do what we can to sort of slow it down so that we can move past the crisis spot. So I think what's lovely about her announcing it is that it brings attention, it brings action, it brings as many partners together as possible to respond. But in her recent announcement today to say, slow down, we need some more support, it speaks to what the crisis does is say, where are our faults, where are our strengths, who is our network, and where can we continue to build and work together. So I think what this does is it brings attention to those who maybe were unaware, as you said, that it's not someone else's issue, it is our issue in our neighborhoods, and these are people that we need to care for. So I think that's helpful. It brings in monies. It brings in potential partners that we didn't know were there. It might bring in some more volunteers. But what needs to happen is we need to figure out, okay, then what do we do in order so that we can address it, so that there will be, as we know, that there is continually a flow. And we can't live in this heightened sense of crisis. Keep responding and responding. We need to have a moment where we can breathe and say, how do we continue to collaborate and create systems so that we're not moving just from crisis to crisis. So I was just thinking of an example, if I could for a moment, is as I'm walking out the door this morning, my neighbor fell. Unexpected, I'm new to the area, I don't know her well. And I realized after dealing with the crisis of her fall, she's got ice, she's got this, I realized that I don't know the local hospitals, I don't know the local routes, I don't know where the police station is or any of these things. And so I think, okay, we took care of the crisis, but now I'm going to need to breathe, she's okay. What will I do so that I have all of those other pieces in place? And I think that's what we are as a state, recognizing that we are still in crisis mode. There are still people flowing in, but we do need a moment to say, how are we all going to work together? Who are our partners? And that's the real focus for me at Jewish Family Service, at Temple Beth Elohim, is saying, we cannot do this alone. We do not go alone. We need to figure out who are our partners, who are our collaborators, who are our networks, so that we can go together and create this net so that we know how to respond. So that's the first thing. And I just want to say one more thing about your paper, if I can. We talked a lot about we are all guests and hosts. We exchange that. When we are a guest, we are also a host, and the responsibility of both of those, the beauty and the responsibility. But I love that you also note that we are all migrants, and you've added that to my repertoire, so thank you.
So in terms of some differences, in 2017, our main direct contact work was in 2 sanctuaries. At that time, we were essentially organizing and trying to protect migrants from being deported. The people who lived in the sanctuary churches, one in Cambridge and one in Newton, literally had ICE after them, trying to chase them. However, by kind of an unwritten rule, ICE agreed that they would not penetrate schools, hospitals, or churches. So that's what we did, 24 hours around the block, around the clock, to make sure that these people were safe. Now, during that time, we also had to see that the kids got to school, that English language learning was done, or well, things like that. So that's a very different situation than we have more recently when we are resettling Ukrainian and Afghan refugees. They both came from horrible situations, in their homeland. Okay, when they got here, they're in a privileged position in terms of immigrants. Okay, they arrive with almost all of them arrive with humanitarian parolee status. They get cash assistance from the federal government. They get work authority. They are eligible for state benefits such as housing assistance, fuel assistance, food assistance, and in some cases even welfare, temporary assistance to needy families. So there's a big difference in the situation that they came into, okay? And there's also then a difference culturally. There are Ukrainians and Afghan and now Haitians and Venezuelans, when before they were mostly Central Americans, okay? And with them comes a different orientation in culture and so on. It brought us into, one thing that's different now is it brought us into contact with a lot of new agencies, including Islamic agencies. The Islamic Circle of North America, the Islamic Cultural Center of Boston, Cambridge, and Roxbury. It was one of my most rewarding experiences to work with these people. I remember going into the training, volunteer training, which was conducted by these Islamic agencies. We were all nervous about, well, the man-woman kind of situation, what to do. They're like, don't worry about that. They know they're in a different place now, okay? You can just act normally. And we did, and it brought us into contact also with some other agencies, including Jewish Family Services, and mostly Jewish Vocational Services, JVS. I'll also point out that in the sanctuary situation, in both of them, we were the only Catholic church involved. Okay, they were all, the new in the sanctuary was overwhelmingly Jewish congregations, and the Cambridge sanctuary was a combination of other, Protestant Christian organizations and Jewish organizations. So that was a learning experience for all of us, and in response to Owen's question, yeah, it was quite different. Some similarities are the same. You have to help people get a job, you have to help people learn English, help the kids go to school, and so on. But otherwise, many differences.
And as you were kind of beginning to explain in that question there, or that answer there, with the idea that new migration flows and new situations have brought different groups of people to the U.S., I wonder if there might be an opportunity to engage in an interreligious dialogue or an interreligious conversation based on the very nature of the people.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say, first, we always wonder how we're received. And I remember when we welcomed Syrian families, a Jewish community which had been, we were worried what would happen when they knew we were Jewish. Our name is in our who we are is in our name. And we were wondering, the rabbi wanted to meet them. Should we introduce them as the rabbi? Should we say who we are? And what we realized was that we just are walking in as people who are there to be a resource. We are not talking about who we are at our core. We are just people trying to be a resource to them, welcoming them over cups of tea, over cups of coffee, conversation, making sure that they had what they needed. And that the Jewish piece came out naturally when they would go to pray, and I would say, I need to leave by 5:30 because I need to go to pray. And through those conversations, they came to our home, our temple. We went to their homes, to their mosques, and through that we realized how much we had in common with our faiths. And how many words we had in common. And so we learned a great deal as we were all surprised that it was more about our commonalities and that we could really use those commonalities to build strengths in relationships. I will say that when we talk about crisis, when we were working with Afghan refugees, Syrian refugees, even Ukrainian refugees, we had a little bit of time. So when we knew that the Syrian families were coming in, we had time to prepare their homes. We had time to put a meal together, a welcoming meal, fill their pantry with spices that they knew. We created teams. We had a lot of time. Then when Afghan refugees came, we had a little bit of a faster pace, but we still had time to prepare homes. Ukrainian refugees, wow, we would find out one day that they'd be coming next week, and we thought, wow, that's a rush. We only have a week. Where we had weeks before, and now we have people arriving, and then we need to do our action. So we have the same systems, but they're crunched. And so I think we now no longer have that respite of time to plan, but we have to use the resources and systems that we had in place to figure out how do we do that crunch, and now that we're doing it once they arrive to get all those pieces in place. But
Yeah, well said. I think I don't have much to add on that, except that we still have Central Americans and others who are coming across the border and who don't have some of the advantages, still have legal liabilities and so on. But once again, it gives us an opportunity to work. It's a blessing to be able to work with so many different kinds of people. And as Debbie said, some are more difficult to help because of timing, because of federal benefits, and so on. I'll add one thing also in terms of this crisis. Yes, Governor Healy calls it a crisis, but so does the Cardinal. So 2 days ago, the Cardinal sent his letter out where he essentially said this is a crisis for immigrants, and he wants all the parishes to respond in some way. So we'll see how that plays out. And also, I will say that last Saturday, we presented what we call the Isaac Hecker Award. He's the founder of the Paulist Fathers, to Sister Norma Pimentel, Executive Director of the Catholic Charities of the Rio Grande Valley. And in her comments, she actually preached. This was done at the 5 o'clock Mass on Saturday at the Willis Center, and she preached. And she started off by saying, this isn't an immigrant crisis. This is a crisis of hatred. Mm-hmm. So back on the differences, yeah, there always had people who didn't like immigrants. But right now, we live in this country where if you like immigrants, you have people protesting against you and stuff like that. So the hatred is something that we all have responsibility for among ourselves and with our people that we work with as well.
Yeah. And I'd like to comment on something that you said there with the idea of refugees having a certain status as opposed to migrants, especially Central American at our southern border. Refugee status does give people opportunity, as you mentioned, to both aid and work authority or work opportunities that a refugee or someone with a tentative migration status might not have. So it's crucial to keep in mind these distinctions when we're talking about this type of care and this type of work that you are both doing. But I think that with the idea of, as it's come up, with responding to crisis situations, I wonder what the goal is in the work that is being done. And especially in the tradition of it being rooted in welcoming the stranger, how do we measure something like that, which seems very abstract, while still maintaining respect for those that you help?
The goal is always self-sufficiency and humanity and keeping they are the focus. There's a really beautiful vision that Highest that you mentioned in Jewish Family Service that we use, which is a picture of our community, but what we're doing is holding hands with the person who has arrived. And the idea is that we're not dragging them forward or running behind, but that we're accompanying them. And to remember that our whole goal is that they arrived, and the picture has the migrant, the refugee arriving with backpacks. And I think about what's in that backpack. And they had to escape from their crisis to arrive here. And what's in there is theirs. They come with not only whatever belongings they can carry, but their experience, their trauma, their strengths, all of their family history, and all of that in those backpacks. And so our goal is to accompany them to understand the Northeast, to understand our community so that they can best thrive here and find a safe place to breathe, to live, to work, and to thrive. We are not here, as you said, to proselytize. We are not here to tell them this is how it is, to put judgment on their decisions, but let them know these are your options. This is how, and then to give them the confidence that they have the capacity to choose. That comes with time. It comes with helping them with English so that they can make those choices. But it's really about self-sufficiency. We always ask the question, what are we doing? Why are we doing? And how do we help them to be able to do for themselves in this community? I mean, they survived a crisis of their own. They had, the fact that they got here tells you that they have those strengths. So we don't need to teach them how to do it, but how to do it in the context of the United States and in the Northeast. And so there's a lot of training that we do so that you can understand what's mine and what's theirs. That I think that judgment piece can come when you come with a feeling that you know best, but really they know best. And so I think respecting that through their faith, through their personal experience, family decisions, and trying to give them the confidence. But we're really here to help them negotiate and navigate, not to decide. So at the beginning, we're going to provide that netting, that scaffolding, and the scaffolding needs to be strong, but it also needs to be adaptable so that you are nimble enough to adjust your scaffolding to follow what it is their needs are. But eventually the idea is that scaffolding will slowly disassemble as they see, and that we're here. Then we are here as a resource they can call upon us. So I really think that it's really about them thriving and them finding their way here in the U.S.
Yeah, I would say everything she said. And the thing for us at the Paulist Center, one of our goals is to get as many Paulist Center members working in this, to give them that opportunity, both learning opportunity and the opportunity to help. Secondly, we put a lot of emphasis on political advocacy, and we've had, by we, I don't mean we, the Paulist Center, but the large coalition based out of Mira, has won some recent, last year, and some recent accomplishments as well. One was the so-called driver's license bill, which means that any person over the age of 18 who passes a written test can get a driver's license. DACA is constantly a public. DACA is deferred. Deferred something for later arrivals. What it means is that if for a certain group of immigrants who were brought here as children, okay, who then grew up here and really knew no other home, that they would be allowed to live here and work, kind of every year kind of renewal kind of a thing. However, so there's attempts to get that into permanent policy. Okay. Also, a big one right now, which we've usually had some success with, is what's called the Tuition Equity Act, which essentially allows migrants who don't have status to get in-state tuition at state universities. Okay. So those are a couple of additional goals that we work on. Advocacy, and get as many of our members as possible doing this work.
And I think that's a good place to kind of open up the conversation and see if people might have some more specific questions.
Owen, Dan's center provides an incredible resource for, I think, the last 3 URFs there have been those large minors. I wanted to ask you, what were the 3 things you learned that most surprised you in the process of working there on the question of, welcoming strangers, welcoming folks back into Boston from the standpoint of these 2 religious groups that you were looking at?
So I think maybe the biggest thing, or the biggest hypothesis that I had when I first came into it, was I thought that people were going to straight off the bat say, I do this because faith compels me to. And so that question of faith was something that I really wanted to center on. And I used that in my questions, but it wasn't the case that faith compels me to do things. But maybe it was more the case that I do this because of my faith. So it's a change of that diction, and it's something that I didn't quite realize at first. I think obviously as well, the second thing might be the similarities that we see in this rhetoric. And of course, you are both engaged in very similar lines of work, but it's not direct overlap, and every case is very specific. So both the overlap that we see, but the specificity of every case. And I think the third thing might be the case of Boston itself as very specific. And as you mentioned, Debbie, the idea of welcoming families not only to the U.S., but especially to the Northeast, and recognizing that the situations that we have here in Boston or Massachusetts or in the Northeast are very specific, and they are not only specific here, but they are different than other geographical parts of the U.S. So I think those 3 things might be.
Okay, and the second part of the question for Debbie and Ed. The most heartbreaking thing I saw last year is the New Yorker, of which I'm an adult reader, has a photograph in one of its issues of the rosaries confiscated by the people who came here. I was devastated. How do you two deal with what was left behind? Like how? So there's an element of grieving. I mean, there's an element of excitement and invitation into new culture, but there's also an element of grieving about what was left behind.
Yes. Oh, that's why that image of the backpack that Hayes describes. And when I first saw it, I sort of ignored the backpack when I saw the picture, but I use it in all of my training, and I think about that. What they had to leave behind, but what you bring is what was torn out, what they actually brought, and what was stolen. And it's just, I think we talk a lot about when we connect with families that it's a real honor to have met them and how they have changed our lives, but we recognize that this was not of their choosing. I mean, no one who arrives at the footsteps of the United States at their border or on the plane, that this was this is their goal. They had always wanted to come to the Northeast. That was their plan all along. They had done all of that, and I think about the women who come when they were pregnant, who we welcomed. That was not their plan. And so we have to really respect and honor that they were thrust here, the bravery, the courage that it took to arrive here and to allow them to grieve at their pace, because they are all in crisis mode, and the breathing part, I say that truly, is one of the first goals, to give them a safe place to sleep and to breathe, and that they slowly get to unpack that backpack and then to replace the items. One of the main, what we do is also help some of those Muslim families to find new prayer mats, new clothing, new coverings, so that they can rebuild their lives, and that is part of that. So, and we don't know the language. So we talked about, we thought, we didn't know what the coverings were called, and the different variations that every country has their own hijabs and their own, we have no idea. And they will teach you, and we will blunder. As you said, we're so worried about how we're going to interact. We assume this humility to respect that, and also not to unpack the backpack for them, that they get to choose when to unpack, they get to choose with whom. We have volunteers, but not every volunteer is who they want to unpack with. So we have to recognize that that comes over time. And with Syrian families, we get to see the arc of 7 years later, who they continue to unpack with, to respect that. Privacy, confidentiality, all part of that humility and that respect. But I'm now beautiful vision of that. Thank you.
I would say, excuse me, I have found that for the most part, that grieving process is done with among their own families and other refugees. I have heard some of their stories, which, and also like you mentioned confidentiality, I've heard some of their stories which are just as gripping as anything you've read in magazines or papers and stuff like that. But of course I would not ask them to go further in that description, okay, out of respect. So I have found them to be remarkably focused on what they're trying to achieve here. I haven't really heard complaints about how bad things were, but they were bad. I know that much from a little bit of probing questions. But I would be at a loss then how to participate in exactly giving them time and space in their grieving, which is so different than anything I've ever experienced.
And I think it's also important to realize the nature of those very pictures. Whereas if you're talking about this conceptual idea of migrants, but when you see very real pictures of people coming off of planes or in detention centers or at the border, it turns this conceptualization into a very real reality. And it's only taken a step further when you actually work with these very people. So that the power of those pictures to maybe even drive people to action as a call to action there.
Questions?
Thank you for this conversation and for the wonderful work that you're doing. What would you see as the primary gaps in the services that are being offered to migrants here in the Boston area? And if you were to reimagine how to best leverage the resources of religious organizations, educational institutions like Boston College on behalf of migrants, what would you envision?
You get to start.
Well, the biggest problem right now is housing. Okay, as you know from reading the paper and so on, read the Cardinal's letter. The resources are not there right now. I will say, believe it or not, a remarkable number of recent immigrants live with a family that opened their house to them. It's usually on a time basis, like within 3 months, we have to find you an actual apartment to live in and stuff like that. But people do open their houses and their hearts to them. Now, will Catholic churches consider that? The Cardinal's letter asks about that. Okay? So there is a resource which is a complicated one to use, perhaps, but that could be out there. Otherwise, we're relying on more money to put more people in hotels. Okay? I mean, not a very good situation. So that goes back to what Debbie said early on and the question about crisis. We're still in a crisis situation. We haven't been able, many times we were unable to get to what will be a true resettlement into our culture. I might mention also that although the Afghan refugees, I can tell you, they consider this to be their new home. They would like to live here. The Ukrainians would like to go back to, I'm generalizing, would like to go back to Ukraine if only the war would stop, or if they could do it. But resources, I mean, we're a country with great resources, but right now we just need more money to build shelters, build affordable housing. We have an overall housing crisis in the state. 7,000 families in shelters right now. Half of them are immigrants, and it's not like it looks like it's going to become less of a problem next year or the year after.
I would agree. Housing is the greatest issue when we have a family who needs a place to live, and then an affordable home in which to live where they can, we're talking about self-sufficiency and thriving, the idea that you can live in a place that you can afford, that you can continue to have your children educated. Many are coming with children. And the next one to be housing is working and having authorization to work. Even those families that come from Afghanistan and from Ukraine was the only community that arrived that you could work right away. You had authorization to work the day you arrived. And you speak to sort of why those policies are for certain communities and not others. But even with that, employers won't hire them because they don't have a document that says. So we have to think about what are our policies around allowing people to work and to earn an income, because otherwise it's our raised funds that are paying for their housing until they can get their authorization to work, get a job that they can afford to pay that rent, and then accumulate enough money that they're not just going from moment to moment. Some communities, so I'd say housing, a job that can pay an income, that can cover the cost. Medical care, again, depending on the refugee status or the migrant who doesn't come here to afford health care. Schools will take you, but you also need to have a physical, you need to have your vaccination. So having a system that can help your child get the vaccinations and proof of all of that, proof of their age, certain things that a school is very willing to have them come, but we have policies that welcome and policies that prevent. So I would say housing, a livable wage, healthcare, and then again with monies that our state we are so lucky to be in Massachusetts, and it's really hard to share with people when they come here. You are because we have families who leave because other family and they move and they get what we had said, which is Massachusetts. The good fortune. And then I would suppose that the next piece with that is just education around English, being able to really get a job that you can afford as having strong English skills. So our state does provide cash assistance and food assistance if you have children, but if you come as an adult, you don't get all of those assistance. So it depends on our faith-based to be able to raise funds to be able to work. So I really think it's about those partnerships. No one community is doing this alone. It's this partnership and network that really creates this scaffolding and netting.
I just mentioned as an aside, excuse me, Owen. Many of your questions will not get a chance to get answered today. So you can reach me at paulistcenterimmigration@gmail. No dots, no capitals. paulistcenterimmigration@gmail. If you want to see the Cardinal's letter, if you want to see something else, I mean, you can reach me there, and I'll try to get information to you. Excuse me, I don't digress.
Well, maybe just to bring us back, but the idea of opportunity that you both presented there, and how do we not only have one opportunity, but opportunities that are long-lasting and that are not just temporary welcoming, but that promote a culture of welcoming too.
Yeah, exactly.
So I live in Arlington, which is where Governor Healy lives. And 2 weekends ago, a neo-Nazi group, NSC 131, marched with torches to her house, chanting, "Keep New England White," and protesting her appeal to help with the migrant crisis and the welcome that the state has offered to refugees and migrants. This is covered very little. I think maybe WBZ had one report. I found out about it through a Facebook group late at night when it happened. So we have white supremacist organizations in Eastern Massachusetts mobilizing against these resources and this aid. And these groups are also openly anti-Semitic as well, and are hostile to the claims of Christianity. So how are your organizations at least having on the radar the question of opposition to this sort of aid?
I could say at as recently as last Saturday when we had the award presentation of Sister Norma, for the first time as we sat in a meeting about it, security came up, right? There was no problem. And we didn't really think there would be, but we understood that it might be. So something becomes part of the planning now. However, we run a Wednesday evening supper club. People come in, homeless people come in and there's a community policeman who always comes. So our Minister for Social Justice spoke with him. He said, "Don't worry, we'll be around." Then we let the local district sergeant know, just so they were aware of this thing, and they might send people around, stuff like that. We had no problem, but it's just one more thing that we have to think about.
Yeah. Jewish Family Service, after the Pittsburgh shooting, we no longer have sort of this open door. You have to be buzzed in, they have to expect you. But part of what Jewish Family Service wants to do is that if you have a need, you can just show up. You can just come in the door and speak to the secretary, the person who welcomes you there. It doesn't feel so welcoming when you have to be buzzed in. So it shifts how we do our work and how we continue to be a welcoming community. I think when we started doing this work 7 years ago as a Jewish community, we were aware. But I think after the Pittsburgh shooting, around the focus was that what we were basing our call to welcome the stranger was the exact reason that we were being hated. And the hatred was coming out of our call to action. So where I would be interviewed and say, "Oh, I don't know if I want to have my name there. I don't know if someone," and then I realized if we continue to support in the shadows, their voice is the loudest. And so, although it does take courage. You just sort of have to just keep going through it and saying our voices need to be louder. But I think security is probably the biggest thing, and to continue to have our voices be loud, and then not just be the voices of those who are being threatened, but everyone else needs to come around and say we are a loud voice as well to support.
So
John, you're a fellow rugby player.
That's a good question there.
I wanted to ask a question about kind of the relationship between like helping single families versus kind of advocating for better resources, et cetera. Because you both have mentioned that it's very powerful and very important to help with specific cases of refugee families. But then to kind of get out of crisis mode, you need more longer lasting solutions, like on the policy side or with more resources. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how you balance that and like where you would ideally like to be like going in the future.
Any thought?
Well, first of all, you're exactly correct. You have to look at the longer term too. As a congregation, we have the advantage of we can mobilize people to take action on the more forward-looking things. What we do, and of course with social media, I mean, we can quickly get out to our members the outline of an issue that's coming up for a vote, a couple of different templates of letters they could use, and instruction of how to do it. All right. So, and that's being done. We're just a member of a coalition, and so there's another 20 or 30 organizations, many of them faith-based. We're doing the same thing to lobby. Also, the Paulist Center has the advantage of our people come from many communities, so we cover many state legislative districts, and we're able to target particular legislators because we know where people live in that district. In terms of longer range planning, I don't sense a lot of that going on right now. First of all, we start off, a lot of the immigrants are being deported, all right, or jailed, stuff like that. Those are the Central Americans. The refugees and the more recent arrivals from Haiti, Venezuela, get status right away. So it's the question of what do they see in their own future? Do they want to stay in the United States, or would they rather go back to their home country? If they would like to stay in the United States, then we have to solve housing, we have to solve jobs. Although right now, I would say jobs, as long as they get employment authorization, they get jobs. There are a lot of jobs in Boston right now. They're not necessarily paying $20 an hour, which is what we need. But nonetheless, the minimum wage is high enough here that they can get by on it. So people get jobs right away. And then the next thing is for the younger ones especially, can we get them back to school? They will go to school and learn how to work in the health field, how to work even in high tech. A lot of the Afghans and Ukrainians were educated in their home country. Okay, not all of them, but a lot of them have. So they actually could go to college and so on. So all of that is planning right now, but I don't see a whole lot of it going on right now.
Yeah, I think it's also just to figure out what moves you. If you are moved in this field and you say, wow, there are so many places to take action. I prefer this space. I prefer the hands-on face-to-face. But there are many people who say, the face-to-face is not where I want to be in this arena, but I prefer to focus on policy. I want to focus on lobbying. I want to focus on the politics that created the situation that thrust them here. And so there is enough room for all of us, but we can't all do everything. So we have an immigration justice. We started out as Syrian Refugee Resettlement Project. We've changed our name to, so we keep changing it because now we're immigration justice. And so what it allows is that there are people who are going to do the face-to-face resettlement, but there's a group of people who care about the policy, who are moved and passionate about the policy. So they're the ones who are sending out the letters, go, this is the phone number to call today, there's a vote. This is a candidate who is running for office who cares about the issues that we care about. So it's really picking what field you feel most comfortable in. and then joining a community that's already doing that work, so that you have a partner, so that you're not sitting alone. We talked about that when you're saying, if I care about this, all you need is one other person, and you're a team. So it's figuring out, is there one other person who cares about it as you do? Then to say, who else do we know who cares about this? And then join that community. And so there's Greater Boston Interfaith Organization that comes together of all faiths to say we care about issues, because you realize when you talked about housing, you talked about fair wage, you talked about healthcare, you talked about all those things. Those are things that people who are U.S. citizens are struggling with. So they all have a ripple effect, and Greater Boston Interfaith Organization is also a community that is doing that work. And so find your space and find out what kind of community to do it with.
I think maybe even returning to the first question that was asked with the idea of what did I learn, I very much learned that a lot of the organizations that are doing this work are very interconnected. So they're not just separated entities, but all, it is naturally an interfaith work that is being done. And so all of these are kind of connected. So I think we have time for one more question.
Yeah. How has doing this work maybe changed or deepened your own faith or spiritual life?
I've been going first for a while.
I was going to say, I think that was what I really enjoyed in our conversations, was what that came out, which I hadn't realized until you asked the question. So you resonate with something that we spoke about, that it goes back and forth. You were saying that it's our faith that compels us. It's our liturgy that compels us. It's our ancestors who did this work, who were migrants that did this, that we say we need or called. But it's the community that I've created that has just said, I'm so glad I have this faith-based work. It makes my faith stronger. It makes my connection with my temple community stronger. And then with all of these other faith-based communities that I never would have met. I grew up on the steps of BC, so I certainly met a Catholic community, but meeting Muslims and different Christian faiths and different people who are atheists as well, who say, I am compelled to do this work. So it really takes, I would say, much more intimate connection with my faith.
Yeah, I probably entered the occupation that I chose, community organizer, mostly because of a faith inclination. Okay, and so this is more of a realization of what I've felt right along. I'm always learning more about, like, Owen did such a great job of how working with immigrants is based in the Jewish and Christian faiths. I will point out one thing is I'm a little uncomfortable with this idea that when I see an immigrant, I see Christ. Okay, when I see an immigrant, I see Mustafa. Okay, he's the person I love. But I'm doing it because I don't want to rule out this whole idea of, coming face to face with God when you do this work. But I mean, it's just something that I think a little bit about and come out on the end that I love this person because love is what we do in these relationships. It's what we do in our religions.
And I will say, within the Jewish and Christian faith, the idea that we all carry that spark of God, however we want to name it, however we want to embrace it. But everyone is built in that image. So no matter what their active faith are now, we're all built in that image. And so you really do see it when you look in another's eyes and become a part of their lives.
Well said.
I want to thank all of you. First of all, I want to thank Owen for his excellent work. You raised a smart son. And I want to thank Dan, who provides such an excellent working spaces. But I especially want to thank our two honored guests here, Debbie and Ed. Thank you for